Welcome back. You're listening to episode 7 of the Animals Everywhere podcast. Remember, the podcast is available on any of your favorite podcasting apps. If you want to go find out any information whatsoever about the podcast, go to animalsathomenetwork.com, click the Animals Everywhere header, and from there you'll find any information you might need, including all the links to all of the audio versions of each episode. So for instance, you can click on any of the previous or current episodes available. That'll take you to a page that'll have all the right links to direct you to any of the podcasting apps to listen to each of the episodes. So for this one, click on episode 7 and it will take you to where you need to go from there. Today's guest is the incredible, world-renowned herpetologist, Johan Marais. In this episode, Johan explains how difficult it was to start learning about reptiles because information wasn't that easy to come by about these animals. Nowadays, we are so privileged to have the access of accurate information right at our fingertips. Yes, it may be more difficult to comb through all the bad and incorrect information in this day and age, but information is way more accessible than it has ever been before. So in a way, we are incredibly privileged to have all this information at the tips of our fingers whenever we so choose. From working at a snake park to freelance writing and fashion photography, Johan has done it all. If you have any herpetological interests whatsoever, I highly recommend you listen to this episode. From herping struggles to run-ins with Africa's Big Five, Johan tells us everything. That includes all the hair-raising experiences, being charged by elephant, buffalo, you name it. Everything seems to happen while out herping. Even the adventures of sleeping under the stars and finding amazing reptiles. Johan also goes over the importance of science and collecting and preserving museum specimens. So, do you want to get into herpetology? Johan also goes over the best way to do that. Without further ado, let's get into this episode. Okay, so are you ready to get into this?
Good.
Awesome. You're listening to Animals Everywhere, a podcast that aims to inspire each and every one of you to make an impact and be the change, learn more about our natural world, explore the lives of those wild and wonderful. My name is Bryce Broom, and I'm best known for my infatuation with wildlife and to live a wild life. Thank you so much for coming out here. It's quite a distance for you to travel, especially at the new place that I've moved to. So I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming out.
It's all downhill.
Well, it's still quite far. You traveled a fair distance. So I want to start off with, where did your fascination with herpetology begin?
Yeah, it's a bit of a vague one, but I think probably at the age of about 6 or 7 when I really started becoming aware of snakes. And I grew up in Durban in an area called Woodlands, and we had bush behind us already, quite destroyed at that time in the sense that it was just chromolina wherever you looked. But we also had Durban dwarf chameleons there in abundance, which are no longer there, and found the odd snake. Brown house snake was the first one. Managed to coax it into something. My mother was not interested in this whole snake thing. But then we had relatives on farms. So the deal was that the relatives would have a cheap holiday coming to Durban, a beach holiday, and we'd go and visit the farms. So the farms were Kuruman, Aramalua, Grootfly Belfort, and every snake that was seen was killed instantly. Everyone just got spades, guns, whatever, and they just killed everything. And I started asking questions, and no one had books. There was no literature. There was no knowledge. And quite sadly, I wasn't really in a position where I could go to someone and quickly learn. A lot of people met Wolf Haku when they were very young, or the late Don Broadley, or whoever. And in Durban, we had Ray Parker as the owner of the snake park, and he was actually an accountant. He had very little real interest in herpetology. So it was difficult.
So there wasn't much to find out?
No, it was difficult. I recall catching a few frogs, and they were sort of rain frogs and Hyperoleus and tree frogs, and taking them to Ray Parker. And I said to him, "Can you help me ID these frogs?" And he said, "I have no idea, but don't tell anyone where you found them because they might get poached."
Oh, true.
Yeah.
That's the sad thing with the current world we live in, and it was already a big thing back then.
Yep, already.
Wow. So you would basically switch houses with your relatives so you don't have to spend on a vacation place.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
That was the deal.
That's pretty cool, I'm not going to lie.
And for us in Durban, it was cool because we'd go to the beach with the relatives, and then you can have hamburgers, which we'd never had. Or you can have watermelon, which we never had. So it was a good deal.
That's quite nice. So you've become a world-renowned herpetologist. How did that happen?
Yeah, Bryce, I think, I had this interest in snakes and it developed more and more. And at the age of about 17, I had an outside enclosure with a bunch of snakes in.
Okay.
And I had snakes in the house and, there's sort of snakes everywhere. I had a crocodile in the garden called Gabriel with a permit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your mom obviously changed a little bit and allowed you to keep stuff
Tolerated
here and there.
me.
Okay.
She tolerated me. Yeah.
Sounds.
My dad was very supportive. I had a guy arrive there by the name of Raymond Taylor, who sadly passed away quite recently. And Raymond kept a few snakes. He was a photolithographer by trade. And he looked in the enclosure in this sort of open pit, and he said, "You shouldn't have those Samophis with the other snakes because they eat snakes." And I said to him, "What's Samophis?" He said, "The sand snakes." And I said, "Why do you call them Samophis?" He said, "That's the Latin name." And I said, "What's the Latin name?" And I had no idea what he's talking about.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely no idea.
Well,
and then my interest really grew, and I started getting the odd book, and which was difficult. There was just about nothing available, and got into I was a drug squad cop in my youth, and then a guy by the name of Fritz Miller bought Fitzsimmons Snake Park.
okay.
Fritz Miller and Rod Patterson were good friends. They were each other's best men at their weddings, and Rod was with Transvaal Snake Park. So met Fritz while I was doing police work, and then I thought, maybe I should go and do a Bachelor of Science degree. And I asked Fritz for work. I said, don't you have work for me? And he said, no, not really. I just bought the place. I don't have money. And I said to him, what do you pay the cleaners here at the snake park? And they were earning pretty much what I earned as a policeman.
Oh, wow.
And he offered me the same salary, so I switched and I started working at Fitzsimmons Snake Park. And that's where it started.
Okay.
Everything started there. Fitzsimmons Snake Park was it was the Wild West. It was chaos. There was outside pits with snakes eating each other. There were snakes escaping. There were snakes dying. You had to go through the park twice a day to remove dead snakes. Snakes were pouring in. Farmers were putting them in paint tins and sending them to the snake park by rail. So you'd get them there a week later. Half would be dead, half were alive. It was actually quite sad in many ways. There's gaboon adders dying, pythons dying. It was chaos.
Is that just because of the low amount of knowledge about these animals and keeping them in captivity?
Yeah, I think that was part of it at the time. But I think the other part of it was that snakes were too accessible. Too many people were just bringing stuff in, and farmers were catching and selling them, and they used to get paid, a few cents per foot or whatever the case was. But I think the big problem was not just the lack of husbandry knowledge, but the fact that the park was very poorly designed and built.
Okay.
Open pits don't work. In fact, I'd like to see the end of them.
Yes.
You chuck a bunch of snakes in a pit, you have a sudden cold spell, they have nowhere to go. You don't know who's eating who and who's eating what.
Yes, very true. It's hard to take account of each animal individually.
And who's picking up whose bugs and parasites and all the rest of it. So that was a big part of the problem. But then I worked there for about 6 months. And then Rod Patterson offered me a job at Transvaal Snake Park. And how this happened is we went up there to visit him, to take him a few snakes, and he exchanged them for a few of our snakes. And I walked through the facility, and they quite recently finished the Terraquarium. I don't know if you ever saw the Terraquarium.
No.
It to this day, it is one of the best public reptile displays in the world I've ever seen. And I've traveled extensively. I've looked at snake parks and all over Asia, Australia, all over the USA, Europe, and the Terraquarium was a mind blow. It was so smartly and so cleverly designed in every aspect. It was designed for the public. There was traffic flow. There was no monotony. You get a lot of our snake parks and you see cage, cage, cage. So you're looking at the first one and nothing's moving. And you think, okay, maybe the second one's more interesting. You get there and the snake's under a rock. Well, maybe the third one. And before you know, you've gone through all of them. You've seen just about nothing.
Yes.
This park, you went around corners. You had a massive big display with rocks and rattlesnakes. And you couldn't see around the corner. You're in a darkened passage and there was a place to move. And you got around the next corner and there's an aquatic tank with snake neck terrapins swimming and water dragons on branches. And you went around the next corner and there were 4 small cages with bright American king snakes in it.
Wow.
And the next one was a massive big mamba enclosure.
That sounds fascinating.
It was brilliant.
It's almost an interactive walkthrough park.
Yeah. And then the inside, where the keepers worked, you had space. It was safe. You could open enclosures without getting pinned against a wall.
Yes.
The place was hygienic. It was just absolutely brilliant. But the bizarre part was, on this first visit of mine, I walked around the terrarium, and I walked around there slowly looking at everything, and there were 43 enclosures in total. And I don't think there was a single reptile that I've ever seen in my life alive.
Wow.
Nothing. Half the stuff I couldn't ID. From king snakes to a variety of rattlesnakes to Gila monsters, beaded lizards. There were mata terrapins. There were oriental fire-bellied toads, taipans, and the list just goes on forever. It was just, I walked out of there and I was like in a daze.
So a lot of exotic stuff.
It was brilliant. All largely exotics. At the entrance to the park, you had some other enclosures with indigenous snakes. You had your snouted cobras and file snakes and house snakes and boomslang and all the rest. But this section was largely exotic. And I'm talking 1980.
Wow.
Or the late 1970s. It was a total mind blow.
That's incredible.
And that's where it all started. So I got there. I was working under Rod Patterson. Excellent with reptile husbandry. We were breeding stuff that no one else was breeding. We didn't have these massive deaths. If something did die, there was a full autopsy. You got veterinarians involved. And that's where I started writing scientific papers. And that was also where I started my writing career, my photography career. Bought my first camera, started writing for the Odd magazine. And by the second year at Transvaal Snake Park, I still have all the paperwork. In my second year at Transvaal Snake Park, I earned 10 times my Snake Park salary with my freelance writing.
Wow.
So I was writing for magazines. I started with snakes, but then I started writing about odd-fashioned steam trains. I wrote about sweet factories, matric hair fashions for girls. And the next thing that happened is I started getting involved in fashion photography.
Okay.
And then I became one of the top ramp fashion photographers in South Africa.
Wow, I didn't know this.
Yeah, so that was a whole different part of my life. And in fact, I was the first person to photograph Suzette van der Merwe, our ex-Miss South Africa.
Okay.
And I was the first person to get into magazines.
Wow.
And so the next thing I was doing, I was going to all these big fashion shows and photographing fashion models, and my photographs were all over magazines.
And while this was going on, were you still working at the Transvaal Snake Park?
Yeah, I was working at the Snake Park. These were my off days. So
I
worked most weekends. So I could get away on a weekday and I could go and do the fashion shows. A lot of the fashion shows were in the evening.
Okay.
But yes, I was writing for a whole bunch of magazines, and then the photography developed, and I was exposed to the likes of Anthony Bannister, one of our best wildlife photographers ever. I mean, Anthony was just absolutely brilliant. And he'd come to the park and he'd be photographing a snake, and I'd say to him, "What lens are you using? What f-stop?" And we were still using film camera in those days. What film are you using? What ISO?
Yes.
And the journalists were pouring in, the newspaper photographers. I was very good at marketing the park. So always had all these little press releases, and we were in the newspapers all the time. And these press guys would come in with their cameras and say, "What camera are you using? What lens is that?" And with this money I was making with my photography, I was buying more and more equipment. I had a relative who was a flight engineer, so he'd buy me stuff in Hong Kong nice and cheap. And in no time, I had much better equipment than most of these newspaper journalists. And they would actually phone me and borrow lenses. "Listen, I'm doing a shoot tomorrow. Can I use your 200 macro internal focus lens?" Or
Wow, that's incredible.
So I built up this massive collection of equipment, and so that's where the whole photography thing started.
Okay, so from the photography, that led on more to just being obsessed with reptiles even more so.
Yes, so the reptiles were, it was a very big love of mine, and my real interest then and even now is obviously reptiles in the wild.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by behavior. I'm fascinated by their whole biology, and what we see is that the more we learn about them, the less we know.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, it's scary. I've just done a total rewrite of my complete guide to snakes. The manuscript's gone into my publisher. I'm busy finalizing the photographs, and I rewrote every species account. And I looked at all the literature from the previous edition, which was 2004 till today, and I've saw what we'd learnt in the meantime. And in some of these snakes, we've learned just about nothing.
Wow.
Scary.
It is scary.
Yeah.
And the more, as you said, the more you know, the more you learn, the less you
know.
actually know.
It's crazy.
It is.
It's crazy.
It's just like the thing of when you hit teenhood or whatever, everybody says you know everything because you act like you know everything. And then by the time you reach 18 or whatever, in most cases, you're like, I actually don't know anything. And I've learned so much more since like early teenhood. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Like now I wouldn't consider myself even knowledgeable on most of these reptiles just because I've learned so much that I know there's way more to learn.
Yep.
And we'll never know it all.
And I think one of the other things that happened then is I started associating with very, very good scientists. And a very dear friend of mine is Prof. Graham Alexander.
Yes.
We became very close friends, and I learned a great deal from him. He really is just an absolutely brilliant scientist. You know, you've got to spend time with him to really appreciate this guy's knowledge. And then, of course, the late Dr. Bill Branch. Bill and myself became very good friends. We did many trips to Nyasa Reserve in northern Mozambique, to Mulanje Mountains. We did a survey there in Malawi, multiple trips. And for about the last 15 years, I've been working very closely with Prof. Aaron Bauer. Now, Aaron is he's a genius. He's not just smart. He's just he's ridiculous. Where most academics are expected to produce 2 scientific papers a year. So if you work for a university, the expectation is you must write at least and have 2 scientific papers a year published. Aaron, I think on his 50th birthday, was 4 papers short of 500.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's insane. He's described over 100 species of reptiles from 5 or 6 or 7 different countries. Probably Southern Africa alone, he must have described close to 30 reptiles already.
Wow, that's a lot.
So I've been working very closely with Aaron, especially in Namibia. We've in the last 15 years, we've gone there every year, once or twice. There's some books in the making. And just a whole bunch of other great scientists. I have 2 dear friends, Paul Moller from Florida, USA. He was the herpetologist there for most of his life. He's now retired. My good friend Randy Babb, the artist, the crazy guy that just... Randy is so rudely talented that it's just ridiculous. He's a brilliant fly fisherman. He's a sharpshooter. He does taxidermy. He draws brilliantly. He knows bats and beetles better than most people. He's an excellent herpetologist. And with them, we've been all over the place. We do field trips. Randy and Paul come out just about every year. We've been to Mexico together. We've collected all over Florida and all over Arizona. So I've really had the privilege of dealing with some of the very best reptile scientists in the world. Yeah, it's you go to Namibia with Aaron Bauer. You've got 18 hours of driving to get there that you can ask him questions. You've got 3 weeks there that you can quiz him every morning, every day, every dinner, every lunch. You just ask him questions all the time.
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest things is knowing people in the industry and learning from each other.
Yeah.
And that's how you get to where you've gotten to now, which is actually a world-renowned herpetologist, which is incredible.
Yeah, I think, if you take, and these, what I like about these guys, they're super smart, they're humble people, they share, they're happy to share their knowledge. Paul is, he's one of my favorite people in the world. And if I write a paper, a 1-page paper about some observation that Paul was involved with, and I'll send it to him, he'll give me a 3-page reply on what I've done wrong.
Wow.
And all very constructive. You go, yeah, that makes sense. He says, you can't say that. You've got to say it this way.
Yes. Wow. So there's a lot to learn from other people.
A heck of a lot to learn from these guys.
Incredible. So you do a lot of field herping. What are some of the struggles you go through to find these amazing creatures out in the wild?
I think I think we've all learnt a heck of a lot in recent years. And when you're out in the field with smart guys like Paul Muller and Randy Babb, Paul's speciality, because he doesn't have the use of his left arm, he lost that to polio as a kid. He only has this one gorilla arm on the right-hand side. So it's difficult for Paul to flip a rock and grab a snake at the same time. So what he does is he specializes in fossorial stuff. So he digs. So he puts a glove on for thorns, and he digs. And he comes up, if you look at scalotes of the 21 odd species in Southern Africa, I think he's found 18 or 19 already.
Wow.
On these trips that we've done. He's brilliant. But Paul will teach you to look in the right places at the right time. He says if you look in the wrong places or at the wrong time, it's 100% waste of time. You're going to find nothing. Randy's very good with that as well. If we pick up a snake track, it's very, very unusual for him not to find the snake, even if it takes hours. He will track it, lose the track, circle, pick up the track, know where to look. So I think we've learnt a lot more about finding snakes and finding reptiles in general. So nowadays, when we go and look for something, we have very, very good results. I needed a photograph of a Swazi rock snake a few months back. Luke, Bianca, myself drove to Mpumalanga, and within half an hour, we photographed a Swazi house snake.
Wow.
Bit of luck as well.
Yes.
I needed a photograph of Amplorinus, a many-spotted reed snake. Ashley and myself drove to the northern Drakensberg. Within half an hour, we photographed an Amplorinus.
Wow. So
if you start really understanding their habits and where to look and when and how and what the problematic factors are, moon phases and weather conditions, temperature, it gets a lot easier.
Yeah.
It gets much easier.
For instance, I've only ever found 2 Swazi rock snakes while out herping, and what I noticed was they seem to be in these large cracks between 2 rocks, so not necessarily underneath a rock. From what I found, they go into the crevices and the cracks of a rock that you can kind of open up, and that's where they tend to hide, but they're extremely fast too.
Yes. So the bizarre thing about this Swazi rock snake is, as we got there, some of the area had been burnt.
Okay.
So I said to Bianca, don't waste too much time in the burnt area. There are a few scattered rocks there, but there's no food around, and so rather let's go and look in the good habitat. And I scratched around in the burnt area and found one.
Wow.
Under a rock.
That's crazy. Under a rock.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Did you find any atropos on that trip too?
No, we weren't targeting them.
Okay.
The last... we've had very good results with berg adders.
Okay.
With Luke and myself. In fact, we were driving to Mozambique to go and find the Mozambique centipede eater, which hasn't really been photographed properly for many, many years. And we just stopped outside Leidenburg, and I think Luke found 3 or 4 berg adders in 20 minutes.
That's insane.
And then we got to Mozambique and to near Nyamban, and we scratched around for this little centipede eater, and Luke found one within half an hour, and we spent 3 days there, another 3 days, and found nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, just about nothing.
So a lot of it has to do with luck then, would you say,
so.
too?
Yeah, but you've got to be there.
Yes.
You're not going to find them if you're sitting in an office.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even if you spend 3 days out there and find nothing, that's still time and effort that you were there looking for the animal. It increases your chances drastically. I mean, if you're not there, you can't find it.
Absolutely. And, there's other stuff, so we have a herpetological interest. So if we find the odd frog, you find the odd little lizard, it's cool. We're very happy to photograph them, and everyone's happy.
Yes. So with herping being your main interest now, how difficult is it to actually go out on these trips?
It's easy. Just turn ignition. That's all you need to do.
But there's quite a few things that go into field herping, like having run-ins. I don't know if you've had any run-ins with some other wildlife that are quite hair-raising stories.
Gosh. So Randy has this thing, he calls them near-death experiences.
Okay.
And his other saying, which I really love, he says it's not an adventure unless there's a likelihood that one or two of the party won't come back alive. So that's important. And we've had quite a few adventures. So I think if you're talking other animals, I worked with crocodiles for 8 years. I was very involved in crocodiles. I was in the crocodile specialist group. I did dozens and dozens of papers on crocodile nutrition and how to incubate eggs and all that sort of. So with crocodiles, it's risky. I had a few close shaves with them. Elephant, I've had a lot of problems with elephant. When Bill, Mo, Rodell, and myself were in Nyasa Reserve, we were charged daily. You go into up on Makilla Mountain, you go into the forest at night, listen carefully, you don't hear anything, wait for 20 minutes, you walk in and boom, you walk into an elephant. So
Wow.
there we had big hassles. I've had encounters with lion and leopard, buffalo. I've nearly been trampled by buffalo twice. And my closest to near-death experience with wildlife is I was kicked to ribbons by an ostrich once.
Wow.
I was kicked and kicked and kicked by an ostrich. I eventually didn't know what to do. I tried to run away, and it obviously overtook me and kicked me down again. And eventually I grabbed it by the neck and pinned it to the ground. And there I was on the ground with this ostrich by the neck, and I didn't know what to do next. I was too scared to let it go.
So what did you do?
I dragged it to the nearest fence.
Okay.
And let it go, climbed up the fence to kick me off the fence. But eventually I managed to get over the fence.
That's insane. And this is all while herping.
Yeah, it's all wild herping. Yeah, yeah. No, a lot of the areas are very wild. Where we do these surveys, like Nyasa Reserve, it's twice the size of Kruger Park.
Okay.
And we were literally, the three of us were dropped off with a little aeroplane, and they left us there for 6 weeks and fetched us 6 weeks later.
Oh wow! And did you have a bunch of supplies that you?
We had very little. So one of the problems we ran into, we were going to drive there, but once it rains in that area, the roads get flooded, and then you're stuck for months. So we rented a little Cessna, and between Bill, Mo, and myself, we were allowed 450 kilograms, including our own weights. And Bill wasn't exactly a lightweight at the time. So they weigh us, and they'd weigh our food and our tent and our binoculars and our books, and we were overweight. Then you leave your Newman's birds behind. And then they weigh again, and you sacrifice the binoculars. And then eventually we had to sacrifice most of the food. So on that trip, I think I lost 14 kilograms.
Wow.
Because we just didn't have enough food.
That's incredible. So did you have to use like primitive skills and also find food there?
Well, we had 2 cups of rice with pasta sauce a day.
Okay.
Eventually, we managed to sourced 3 live chickens. We ate one. The second one was really not very tasty, and the third one we released. It just was, they were tough as hell. I was quite lucky because we were about a month away from mango season, and the mango trees were full of big, rock-hard green mangoes. And I grew up in Durban. I ate green mangoes. So I ate green mangoes. I was fine. Just pick a bunch of mangoes. Bill and Mo tried it, and it didn't work for them. They got chipper guts very, very quickly.
That's hilarious. So obviously, if you're out there for 6 weeks, you can't really take camera gear with a bunch of batteries.
We took basic camera gear with. That was
Okay.
the most important. Yeah, camera gear, we go nowhere without that. So we took enough camera gear with us, yeah.
Okay. But by then it was still film, right?
So on that trip, we actually had a little bit of... No, sorry, I'm getting mixed up with the Manji trip. That trip was all film, yeah.
Okay.
So now the other thing with film, which guys nowadays don't realize, you're taking pictures, you don't see any results.
Yes.
You come back and process it.
And then
Then you see where you've overexposed and screwed up.
oh, that must be a pain, especially 6 weeks out in the middle of nowhere, getting probably some insane wildlife experiences and finding some insane things, and possibly finding out, oh no, this was it's a white photo, overexposed or underexposed.
It's problematic because, for instance, we found some new species, undescribed species. So now you photograph a new species, you euthanize it because you're going to describe it, take out some liver for DNA and all that sort of stuff, and you come back and you hope you have decent photographs.
Did you have any decent photographs of those species? Okay, at least.
Yeah, no, we did. Yeah.
But I'm sure you've had experiences where you don't have decent photographs of animals also.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you spend a day or two and your photographs really suck, or as has happened very rarely, but it's happened to most photographers. It's happened to me twice, where I would download a bunch of photographs and somehow in the process lose them. It's quite easy.
It is. I've had that with quite a few files of video. It's not the nicest thing, especially when you've gone somewhere like yourself and traveled out to do this specifically, and then you've lost all the images.
I was with Paul and Randy in Namibia, and I was photographing the little gecko that Aaron named after me, Pachyctus marais. Now, I photographed it a few times. I have lots of images. But I really went to a lot of trouble on that day, and I lost all those images.
Oh, that's
Somehow
terrible.
got lost.
So, what are some of your most memorable herping experiences?
I love Namaqualand, and every chance I get down to Namaqualand, and I've had fantastic times in Namaqualand with amazing finds. Obviously, a trip like Nyasa or a trip like Mulanje Mountains, where you're there for 3 weeks, those trips are just mind blows. They're just really special. So there's a lot of great memories of it. One of the things that really stands out is back in 1982. We did a very quick trip, and if I remember correctly, it was with the late John Locher. I don't know if you've heard that name. John was a very interesting guy, absolute reptile fanatic. And Donald Strader was on that trip.
Okay.
And we were driving at night, and we found, between Steinkopf and Fjordsdrift, we found a dead-on-road Lamprophis fiskie, a fisk house snake. But the same night, between Steinkopf down the Ananas Pass on the way to Port Nolloth, we found another dead-on-road Fisk's house snake. We had no idea what we found. No one really knew much about. At that stage, Fisk's house snakes were known from Toes River and Worcester only, nowhere else. So we picked up the 62 Fitzsimmons snake book, and it actually had mislabeled it as Fiscus, not as Fiskie. So we even thought we caught a Fiscus, not a Fiskie. It's quite bizarre. Anyway, I wrote that up, and the whole, it was a massive range extension for Fisk's house snake. And then over the years, a few were popped up at Victoria West, where a truck driver, the name of Kitty Buerta, was finding them. Most of those went to the late John Visser. And there was very little coming out of Springbok. It was just sort of unheard of. And then Graham Alexander and myself went there in 2005, and the first night we drive, we found a dead-on-road fiskie. It's like, how crazy is that?
And have you found a live one
I've never found a live one.
That's terrible.
Never. In fact, when we found this one at night, we marked the spot with a GPS, and we were both very excited. We went back the next morning. Now we can check out the habitat. We know exactly where to look. And we got there the next morning, and it was just karua bossies. There was nothing else. Just miles and miles and miles of just karua bossies.
That's
insane.
heartbreaking too. I mean, it does show what a huge impact just roads and cars actually have on wildlife, especially those smaller snakes and reptiles.
Yeah. I think we often, there's a lot of things we underestimate when it comes to conservation, but I have no doubt that our major issue is habitat destruction. Once the habitat's gone, it's finished.
Yes,
that's our biggest problem. If we talk about poaching, dwarf adders, I'm certainly not in favor of people ripping off areas and going to Mount Sheba and taking 30 berg adders, and I've found 20 berg adders in the morning, But so if we road cruising in the Springbok area, we find 6 cornutas in one night. The same night we'll find 20 dead on road. So these things have a massive impact. It's enormous.
The human wildlife conflict is probably the biggest thing that. In every way, because we are encroaching more and more onto their habitat, and when there's no habitat for them, inevitably they cannot survive unless those few that are able to adapt and change.
Yeah, and as we, as humans keep on breeding and multiplying, it's just getting worse and worse. It's a disaster.
So, what are some of the, not just the memorable herping finds, but some of your favorite finds while out herping, specifically reptiles?
Sure. There are 2 reptiles that have been named after me. Obviously, finding them both were very special. The one is the Marais gecko, and for a long time we actually might have confused that with Pachydathlus bicolor, because Pachydathlus bicolor has 2 color variations. And the spotted version looks a little bit like Marais, so one can confuse those. And then up in northern Mozambique, I found a worm lizard, a Zygaspis, that the late Don Broadley named after me. And to this day, known from a single individual, and they've never been found again yet.
Wow.
But the area is not well collected. If we spend more time up there, we will find more.
Okay.
So obviously those do stand out. I think it's a great honor to have something named after you, but to have it named after you by prominent herpetologists like Aaron Bauer and Don Broadley, that's very, very
extremely special.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely,
very true.
And Don, in his description of the Zygaspis, he said, and Aaron did the same. That it was named after me for my contribution to herpetology, which I thought was pretty cool.
That's very cool. It shows like their great respect for you in an essence too. What is the purpose of herping besides the fun behind it and the thrill of like finding these amazing creatures?
Obviously, a large part of it is learning more about them. And we do too little of this. We need to spend more time. You find a black mamba, you need to watch it for the next 5 hours. Don't just try and grab it and see it disappear down a crevice.
Yes.
And we're all guilty of that. But a lot of the work that I have been doing has been on formal surveys. A lot of the work with Aaron Bauer, when we tried to really look at the genetics of all the reptiles in Namibia. So we would target a specific lizard and go to the type locality. So that was described in 1884, and you go to the exact same farm, the exact spot, and we want a specimen from where the type is from to get DNA from it. So a lot of those trips have been very, very focused, where we either trying to find specimens for DNA, or where we're trying to answer some questions. Are there different species? Does this occur there? Was the type from the right place? Because in the past there were lots of errors. So a lot of it is very, very focused work. But we do a lot of fun trips, and obviously my passion is photography, and always busy looking for stuff to photograph. At the moment, Luke Kemp and myself are working on a book on the reptiles and amphibians of Southern Africa. So we're looking at close to 700 species in one book. So we are photographing like crazy.
I can imagine. And that's one big thing. Even if you're going on like a weekend trip for fun, herping, you can catch a lot of things and photograph them for books a few years in the future, which contributes to science as well.
Absolutely. So you might go on a Durban holiday and you scratch around on the bluff and there's a rain frog. Photograph it. Get decent pictures.
So how do you live while you are out herping, especially because most of these animals are awake during absurd hours?
So it depends who the trip is with. So nowadays with Paul and Randy, we'll live in semi-luxury. So we'll sleep out in the veld when we need to, but if every third or fourth night you can book into a little chalet where you can have a hot shower, it's quite pleasant. We might have the odd braai, but most of the time, we don't do warm food, because from sunset till the early hours of the morning, it's herping time. There's no time to make a fire. You don't cook. There's none of that. You don't go to Spur or to whatever, because you're wasting time. So with Aaron, it's quite rough. He would invariably make us live off buns with peanut butter and syrup for days, and we'd have a cardboard box at the back of the pickup truck full of buns, and after 3 days they're sort of hard and dusty, and then we'd go through the town, and I'd say to Aaron, let's just stop off at the local cafe and buy some bread rolls. Pick up one of the buns. He says, no, I think these are still good. Don't have to change them yet.
And they're almost rock solid.
And they're like rock solid and full of dust, and I don't do cheap cheese. Aaron puts cheap cheese on these bread rolls, and after 3 or 4 days in the field, when you pick up that plastic bag with the cheese, it's like orangey oil running into the corner.
Oh, gross.
I can't. I'm happy to do the peanut butter. Bill didn't do peanut butter, so there was a lot of fighting about food. But yeah, food is not a big issue. We don't take a gas stove. We don't take matches. We don't take a freezer. We're there to herp.
Yes.
We take water and we buy food. And a lot of our camping, we don't do camping sites really. We avoid them because they're noisy and people drinking and going on. So we sleep in the bush, and more often than not, we don't use a tent. We just stop the vehicle, get to a sleeping bag, sleep, and carry on again.
That's way cooler than sleeping
absolutely.
at a camping site. I mean, the memories you'll make there, and you can listen to the wild too.
Absolutely,
not some other
and
campers.
the guys. So you might be very, very tired, but one of the other guys might not. So Randy's quite. He's just insane. He would herp really hard all day and night, and then at midnight when we start sort of passing out, he will sit in the vehicle with the little light inside the car, and he'll do his drawings, his paintings. He does the most. So he'll take a little barking gecko, and he'll draw it with pencil, and then he takes his pastels and he colors it in. And when he's done, you can use that in a field guide to reptiles. It is a perfect drawing.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's how the original books and that were formed, not by photographs, by someone dedicated like that. And that's a true talent.
And he does these drawings in his field notes. So he'll have a book with his field notes. We drove so many kilometers. This is what we had for lunch. We found this there. These are the GPS coordinates. And then he'll draw a barking gecko. Then he'll draw a starling because he saw a bird that he hasn't seen before. And he draws a perfect starling that can go into Sasol birds. It's like insane.
That's so cool. And living like that that's like truly living in the African experience.
Yeah.
I mean, not living in fancy resorts.
I think the other thing is, field trips are really expensive. I mentioned to you as I got here that over the last 40 years on vehicles and camera equipment and trips and everything, I've spent over 10 million rand just on my hobby.
That's crazy.
But so you drive 8,000-9,000 kilometers. It's expensive.
It is.
So if you can sleep in the bush and eat a few bread rolls, it makes you can do more trips than if you would staying in fancy accommodation.
And going on these trips, I know it's expensive on the fuel too, but as well as the vehicle. There was recently something you posted about you going through a certain amount of like tires on a Namibian trip or somewhere.
Yeah, that trip I lost 5 tires. I've gone through, over the last 40 years, I've gone through a dozen 4x4 vehicles. Some of my vehicles, the Land Cruiser I used to go up to Mulanje in Malawi, I did about 500,000 kilometers on that. But I'm in a very fortunate position now. My vehicle is severely sponsored. I've got the guys from Opposite Lock that supplied me with the suspension. The roof rack comes from Front Runner. The seats from Tukla. The lights from Light Force. Even the tires are from BF Goodrich. Everything is totally sponsored.
That helps out a lot.
It helps tremendously. Yeah.
So how come you went through 5 tires on one trip?
The roads are bad. So what's happened in Namibia, and this is a major problem, obviously before COVID, is that the country is overrun with tourists. There are too many people on the roads. The pressure on the roads is just out of control, and the roads are getting really bad. So there's rocks all over the place, sharp rocks. It's problematic. And we travel. We don't exactly travel on the highways when we get to Namibia. We travel to get there. Then a lot of the areas until recently, we were still using maps to reach these spots. Now we use GPSs.
Yes.
But we go in very remote areas. Places like Gaius between Subatsfontein and Henties Bay. Brilliant places, incredible reptiles. But very few people have seen them.
Yes, because it's not the easiest
Middle of nowhere.
Yeah. But that's where you want to get to
exactly.
Find these animals. Do you often find yourself like hiking kilometers into the bush or the middle of nowhere and then just camping out there for the night and just carrying on?
So usually we'll have a base camp and then I'll hike into the mountains. And with Bill and Erin, Bill would get very, very cross with me because we'd get somewhere and he'd say, okay, guys, let's work as a team. If we're going to, one guy might need help lifting a really big rock or whatever. And what I've found is the moment you get to a rocky area, most of the reptiles happen at the base. So you get the vast majority of things at the base. It's the same in the sea. If you're going along sand and suddenly there's a reef, where the moment you have relief, that's where the action is. But you're not necessarily going to get the rarities. So I always leave Bill and Erin to do the common stuff around the edges, and I disappear. And I'll go 3, 4, 5 hours into mountains, and we crawl around kranzes at 2 a.m. with torches. That's when you get interesting stuff. And very often I get back, and Erin and Bill will be sitting in the vehicle fast asleep, but at least they got the specimens. So Erin always knew that I'll bring some pretty cool specimens back. So he would sit there and read a book eventually, and it's not unusual for them to wait for me for 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So when you find these reptiles, are you catching them also or just photographing?
So on surveys, we always under permit, obviously. Then we're catching. Then we're sacrificing specimens for museum collections. We're taking DNA. We're taking blood samples for parasites. So it's a whole process. So we would collect all day, collect all night, and then early morning I do the photography. And as I photograph the specimens, Aaron then euthanizes them, and then it's a heck of a process. All the guys sit down. You've got to carefully cut out liver. You've got to have 3 or 4 different sample bottles. You've got to label everything, enter them into catalogs. You've got to then fix them in formalin, and fixing reptiles and amphibians is an art. And it's because you've got to make sure if it's a gecko, every toe is open. You can check them lamellae. We pose them in different ways for different museums. That is a whole full-time job in its own.
So the back of the pickup truck obviously has to have a bunch of that equipment too.
Yes, yeah, everything's in the pickup truck. So camera equipment, bit of camping gear, all the scientific equipment, everything goes with. It's a lot of planning. You need ample torches, batteries. We invariably have inverters to charge camera batteries and stuff like that. But we're not very good campers, so we don't really have all the fancy draw systems and the roof tents and all of that necessarily. We just want to get there and herp.
Yes,
yeah.
But that's probably the real camping down to the
Absolutely.
core. It's not living in luxury in the bush. It's living in the bush with a sleeping bag, and that's it.
Yeah, it's all about herping.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what are the reasons for preserving some of these species?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question. So basically, to start off with, is you cannot conserve or protect any reptile unless you know what it is. So if you look at historic distribution maps, if you look at the 1962 Fitzsimmons book, every little square that you see there, those are usually quarter-degree grid squares. That's roughly 26 by 27 kilometers, or around 645 square kilometers. There's a reptile from that square that's preserved in a museum. And the importance for that is that any scientist can go and check and verify that record. So if Harry says to you that he's seen black mambas and parais in the Free State, first of all, he might be wrong. He may have seen an escapee, but he's probably wrong. And how can you trust Harry? And what happens if a bus flattens Harry tomorrow? We don't have that knowledge anymore. But if he preserves a specimen and it's in a museum, then we can recognize that. And the same for distribution. You can't say that this gecko needs protection because it occurs there, and there if we don't have evidence. So preserved specimens are evidence. There's a specimen from that area. It's in a museum collection, in a recognized museum where any scientist can go and examine the specimen, put it under a microscope, and says, yes, Professor Bauer was correct. This is Pactacus marais. It's not something else. So that's very, very important, because without that's science. So what we've done in recent years is we've now introduced virtual museums. And virtual museums are pretty cool, because now people can photograph a specimen, they can submit it to a virtual museum, and if you send it to the Reptile Atlas, there at least 2 reptile experts have to agree on the identification. If 2 don't agree, we don't accept it as a record. But once 2 recognize it, then that goes in a different color on the map, and so there's photographic evidence. The hardcore scientists still want specimens in museums. So some people might say, but why do you want to kill a whole bunch of geckos? I mean, this is such a nice gecko. It's not that common. It's science. Without science, we have nothing. Without specimens in museums, we have no good evidence that is where it comes from. So it's a very, very small price to pay. It's a very important price to pay.
And even with species that are like highly endangered, or something like the Fisk's house snake that you yourself have never seen a live animal, would you still then go out and preserve that animal?
So it depends what study you're on. First of all, it's got to be under permit. So you're not going to get a permit, you just go out killing fish snakes for the hell of it.
Yes.
You know, it's got to be very, very good reasons. There are animal ethics committees at the universities. It's very, very complex nowadays. So for Fisk's house snake, we have a pretty good idea of their distribution. It's very scattered, and it's not because it's a super rare snake. It's a secretive snake. We have no population study on any snake in southern Africa, so no one can tell you that cream-spotted mountain snakes are rare, because no one knows how many there are. They have no idea. That they're secretive, that we know. So for Fisk's house snake, there's no reason to kill them. If I'm on a field trip now and I see one, I'd happily photograph it, submit it to the virtual museum. I might take a tail tip, because DNA could be useful, but it's got to be under permit.
Yes.
They're very, very, very strict. To give you an example, for the book that Luke and myself are doing now on the reptiles and amphibians of southern Africa, we have a permit in specific provinces to photograph reptiles in the wild and in game and nature reserves. But without that permit, I'm not allowed to go to Northern Cape, catch a armadillo lizard, pose it on a rock and photograph it. It's illegal.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. So there's a lot more that goes
very,
into
very
herping.
Complex, yeah.
And how difficult is it to get those permits?
So if you're doing a university project, if you're on a project, then you will submit your motivation, why you need it, and they will look at it and hopefully favorably. A lot of the research that I do, I'm on permits with other projects. So if Aaron comes out from America to go to Namibia, go to the Northern Cape, Western Cape, there's no ways we will go without the paperwork. We only work under permit.
Yes, that makes sense.
So much so that we've had to cancel at the last moment trips to Angola where everything is sort of arranged and the permit doesn't come through. We can the trip.
That's terrible.
You cannot publish in a decent scientific journal your findings if you don't have permits for what you're doing.
Okay, that makes sense. So, in a way, avid or not avid herpers, people who are just going out herping for fun, they need to know the areas where they are actually herping and if it's legal to do what they are doing.
Yeah, that's important, and it's becoming quite problematic because if you get picked up in Springbok with 2 or 3 brown house snakes in your car, and you're probably going to end up with a 20,000, 40,000 rand fine. There's been cases recently where guys' vehicles have been impounded. They impound the vehicle and they crush it.
Wow.
Your vehicle goes into a crusher because you've been smuggling.
Is that like for the collecting part or just like going out and photographing?
No, that's for collecting and smuggling. That's
okay.
It's a little bit crazy to some degree because I still have a major issue that a kid in Gauteng cannot keep a brown house snake or an egg eater. I think that is insane. I think it is madness. So he can buy a neonate Western Diamondback rattlesnakes at a reptile show, but he can't keep an egg eater. It's ridiculous. And we're talking to the authorities. That's going to change.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's going to change very soon.
That's amazing. That's nice to know. But doesn't that bring up other issues like with something escaping or whatever and contaminating gene pool, or is that not?
Well, everything's an issue. So we're sitting now with a whole tortoise issue where leopard tortoises get picked up by people, taken to the zoos sell them to reptile dealers, and they export them. And that shouldn't be done. That's nonsense. What prevents me as a reptile exporter to encourage people to just grab tortoises and drop them at the zoo and I'll pick them up later? So I can create myself a whole big market. Genetic purity is problematic, but we have exotics. You can have exotics escaping. You can have exotics with their parasites contaminating local reptiles.
Yes.
Just as you could have a brown house snake escaping,
Yeah.
So I don't think a kid keeping a brown house snake in the suburbs, the chance of it escaping and contaminating the gene pool is like close to zero.
Yes.
That doesn't worry me.
Makes sense. And something like you said earlier about not knowing what species are actually endangered because it's very hard to survey these animals. With Bitis gabonica, our East African gaboon vipers, how come it's then listed on, like, what's it, the IUCN as endangered?
So if you look, that work's been very well done with the Reptile Atlas. It's now just been revised. I think a new report will come out very, very shortly.
Okay. And
IUCN have a whole list of criteria, and they look at everything. So you look at how wide an area does a reptile occur in. So you'll take the known distribution, you draw a polygon around it, you say it occurs there. But now within that distribution, if it's a spotted rock snake, it doesn't occur in the grasslands. Now you've got to work out where there are rock formations, and we've done that. So you can say, well, that's the distribution. The actual area that it lives in is only 12,000 square kilometers. And then you look at other variables. Is there evidence of a reduction in adult population? Is there evidence of severe habitat destruction? What other threats are there? Is there major poaching? And if you take some of the snakes, poaching could have a big effect on them. If you go to Mount Sheba and take 30 berg adders, you're hurting a population.
Yes.
No question. If you're talking about Fisk's house snakes, how can you hurt a population where you can barely find them?
Very true.
Yeah, so that's not the big issue. So with the IUCN criteria, they look at all these variables, and then you have reptile scientists that will then come to conclusions and say, I declare this endangered or vulnerable or near vulnerable, and here are all my reasons, and then they accept that, and then it can change, And historically, we made that mistake. Charismatic species like pythons in the 1988 Red Data Book was declared an endangered or threatened species. They're abundant. They're like house snakes. They're everywhere. They're not threatened in the least. They're still a top species. They're still protected, but they're not endangered at all.
So then why was it listed back then as endangered?
Lack of knowledge. We use the charismatic, pythons. No, pythons are good. They eat cane rats. They help the sugarcane farmers. They control dussies. We've got to protect these animals. We didn't have the knowledge.
Okay. Yeah. So it all comes to doing a lot more research and studies on these animals. And that's hours out in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got dozens and dozens of brilliant herpetologists working on various different projects, and you quite underestimated a lot of the work that I've been doing with Erin over the last 15 years. We have 2 or 3 or 4 master students with us. So Erin will identify a problem, let's say Pachydaculus babroni and Turneri, and then you get into Namibia and they talk about Fitzsimonsi, and he sees this is a mess. We need to investigate these, and then he put a master student on the project. The master student will spend 2 or 3 or 4 years, massive sampling, and now the whole Chondrodactylus issue has largely been resolved. There's still more publications coming out, but there's 2 new species, and what we thought in the past was Turneri is not Turneri.
Oh, wow.
There you now have Lavigatus, you have Pulitzeri, and they're still busy putting together. So very soon we'll have good, accurate new maps for exactly what's going on. But at the moment, we have no idea.
Yes.
It's a mess.
And with splitting up these animals, what is the point of splitting up most of them to degrees that there's only a scale difference in these animals?
Well, again, how do you preserve an animal if you don't know what it is? How can you preserve Chondrodactylus pulitzeri, which wasn't described before? No one even knows it exists.
Yes.
So we can lose an animal before we even described it, and that's happened. So it's very important that we know what's going on. We've got to define a species. We've got to work out what is its distribution, what is its habitat requirements. And once we've done that, then we can start talking conservation. And before that, it's irrelevant. And the individual doesn't matter. We get very excited, catch and release, if we're talking problem snakes.
Yes.
And I'm a great supporter of catch and release. A lot of that makes us feel better. It's not conservation. I rescue a Rinkhals here in someone's garden, I take it down the road and I release it. It's good for the individual. It's not really conservation. We're fooling ourselves if we think that.
Yes.
The conservation is looking at the species in general, looking at its habitat, looking at the threats. There's a lot of talk about relocated reptiles dying, snakes not surviving. And there have been a few studies overseas where they have very, very high fatality rates. In some of these studies, every single relocated snake has died within 6 months. But you can't now take that information and extrapolate it and say that it applies here, because you've got to look at the different species.
Yes.
Rinkhals and puffer and mambas behave differently. So we have no idea how many of these snakes that we relocate survive, but we also have no idea how many wild snakes survive.
Yes.
And we mustn't forget that. Graham's work with the pufferers at Kualata, I think something like half of his pufferers were eaten by snouted cobras. So now if you relocate a bunch of pufferers and half of them don't survive, well, half of them might have been eaten by snouted cobras anyway.
Yes.
So yes, please rescue the snake. Just be careful when you release it. Think about it. Make sure it's away from people, that it's good habitat, that it makes sense, and go and release it there. And do it under permit. Don't look for trouble.
And do it as close to where you found it as possible, right?
Yeah, within 5 or 10 or 20 kilometers. That's not going to screw up a gene pool.
Okay.
But if you don't want to take 300 kilometers, you don't want to release a Gauteng Rinkhals and Clarence or something like that. That's just silly.
Yes, very true. And like what we're finding is they are actually very different from the ones down in Clarence or the Cockstad wrinkles, their venom and all of that is considerably different to our Gauteng localities too.
Well, the snakes do vary. If you look at the work that has recently been done, genetically, the variation, if you look at the two extremes, might be quite big, but if you look at it throughout the range, it's insignificant.
Yes.
If you look at the venom throughout the range, there might be quite large differences, but the problem is, if you want to start talking venom, you really need big sampling.
Yeah.
So the venom doesn't differ to the degree that we can say that a bite in Clarence and one in Gauteng and in the Eastern Cape is going to be remarkably different. What you must remember about snake bites, every single snake bite is absolutely unique. Whether it's a mamba bite, it doesn't matter what it is. There's no two mamba bites that are the same. And this is a very important aspect when doctors approach a snake bite. They can't say, I have another Cape Cobra bite. Right, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to look for this and this. And if this happens, it doesn't work that way. These bites are unique. They vary because of the snake, the amount of venom, where it bites, the consistency of the venom. It varies because of your size, your age, your weight, your medical conditions. All of these things come into play.
The individuality, I don't know why my tongue's slipping there, of each human and each snake does affect every
Absolutely.
bite differently. Even if the same person's been bitten by the same species multiple times, they can have different results each time.
And we had a very, very interesting example recently. A 71-year-old man walked past a many-horn adder in a shrub, got bitten just above the ankle. And we've looked at many-horn adder bites. They're inconvenient. It could be some swelling a week later. You should be okay. Within 4 days, he had a blister on his foot twice the size of a tennis ball. A massive blister. His whole foot was all discolored. It's now been over, I think, 3.5 weeks, and he's now well on the way to recovery. But it was a very, very, very nasty bite. So don't ever underestimate any venomous snake.
Yes, and that goes for like even the snakes that are not medically significant, because you can build up an allergy, your body creating IgEs, and basically your immune system overreacting to environmental antigens such as the venom.
I've got that now. If I drive in my vehicle with a spitting cobra and a tub in the back, I start sneezing. I sneeze all the way.
That's terrible.
So I stay away from spitting cobras.
Yes. So with the catch and release, is there any work being done in South Africa of the survival rate once a snake's been relocated and released again?
Bryce, nothing that I know of. And the reason for that is the cost. The only way that you can do a study like that is, first of all, you need a significant sample size. So it doesn't help you to put radio trackers in 3 black mambas and release them and follow them around and see if they survive. It's too small a sample size. You need a big sample size, number one. Radio trackers, you're talking 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 rand per snake. You need a student to follow that snake. You need 10 snakes. One student can't follow 10 snakes per day. So it's very labor intensive. The other aspect is that if you're going to do that, you're going to have to do it on multiple species. So you're going to have to do some of it on puff adders, on rinkles, on black mambas, Cape Cobras, and so it goes on and on. Otherwise, you have results for black mambas, and you can't say that the same is going to happen with puff adders.
Yes.
So purely from a cost point of view, I don't believe that study will ever be done. There's no chance.
Okay, that does make sense. But personally, what are your thoughts on catch and release? Like, what would you think the survival rate is? Do you think it's higher than a lot of the people predict? Because I think some of the predictions are like 90%.
Yeah, that's unlikely.
Death rate, or
throughout the range of a species, it's unlikely. So yes, it could be high, but again, what is the survival rate of adult puff adders in the wild? We have no idea. What is the population of puff adders in Gauteng? We have zero idea. What's the population of puff adders in a single farm? Back in my Transvaal Snake Park days, we had a farmer in Lichtenburg. He had a massive big land that had been barren for about 5 or 6 years, full of rodent holes and weeds. And he started plying it up, and he said to us, listen, I'm plying this up and I'm finding puff adders. Do you guys want them? And we said, yeah, sure, bring them. And he brought us 150 odd puff adders from one land.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's insane. So we have no idea, So what is the survival rate? We have absolutely no idea. Do I want snakes rescued and released? Of course. I don't want people chopping snakes' heads off or taking out a shotgun. That's insane. where does conservation start then? You can't just kill animals because you feel like it.
Yes.
So, and this is, it is complex, because now to get back to the tortoise issue, what do we do with these tortoises? They've got parasites, they've got diseases. That's no reason to euthanize them. One of the answers now is just euthanize them. What are you going to euthanize thousands of tortoises every year just because they have snotty noses and they end up at a zoo? That's criminal.
Yeah.
So a lot of those diseases can be cured. Cure them, treat them. It's not that difficult. It's not that complex. And if we're worried about the genetics? Firstly, I think that leopard tortoise genetics are a mess. They've been scattered all over the country for years and years.
Yes.
But there are soft solutions. Find eco states. Go to the Hoedspruit Wildlife Estate. Guys, can we release 500 tortoises here? People would love it. There's wildlife estates all over the place. They're fenced in. Go release them there. Or if people have a single tortoise in their garden, give them a permit, let them keep it, give them a little booklet on how to care for your tortoise so they don't feed them the wrong diets. And obviously you don't want to encourage them to breed them. But why shouldn't people have a tortoise in their garden? Is a tortoise worse off in someone's garden as opposed to being euthanized? That's insane.
It is.
Yeah, it's madness.
It is insane, because that's where conservation also starts.
Exactly.
One little kid, his parents got a tortoise, and he's grown up with this tortoise. Now he's in love with tortoises, and he wants to then go out and study herpetology or study tortoise conservation.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
So what does it take to describe a new species?
Oh, that's a nightmare. That is an absolute nightmare, and you need the Werner Conradis of this world and the Luc Verbergs, these crazy scientists who have the dedication, they have the knowledge. It's very complex. So let's say, for instance, the one that the Chordylus peculiae that I found with Mo and with Bill up in Nyasa Reserve that we described together. Nowadays, we take DNA, we look at the genetics, we compare it then with other chordylids in the family. You then have to look at all other comparable material. You look for variables, you look at scale counts, you look at tail lengths and distance between the eye and the nose, and it goes on and on forever. And once you've got all of these variables together, you can then say, right, I have very valid reasons why this is a different species. Morphologically, these are the differences. Genetically, these are the differences. Now I'm going to describe it, and then you have to, you need a type specimen, you need a few holotypes, you need a few specimens that go to a recognized museum where they're kept, where anyone can come and examine them. And you need to work out a distribution, and you want to, in a description, also say something about its behavior, what you've learnt, where do they occur, what is the habitat. It's a very, very complex situation. And of course, if you don't do a good job, someone's going to come and sink it and say, well, you guys said this and this and that, but that's a load of rubbish. And over the years, we've had a lot of reptiles that were described, and they were sunk and synonymized. Aspidolaps lubricus infuscatus, the intermediate coral snake that was between the South African population of Cape coral snakes and the Cunene coral snake. That's been sunk. That's been synonymized with Kelsey. It wasn't a good species. It wasn't well thought out. You've got to be very careful about a range. People would look at the moment we have two subspecies of Nicricincta. So we've got the black spinning cobra, Nicricincta woody, and that's in sort of from the Cape Fold Mountains up into southern Namibia. And then it overlaps with the zebra cobra, Nicricincta, going right into Angola. But if you take snakes from the southern extreme of the range and you take as many localities as you can, all the way up into Angola, and you lay them together, you can see a gradual change from the black spinning cobra to intergrades in southern Namibia, and then you get well-banded ones. And when you get to Angola, they're like a yellowish color, a yellowish-orange color with very little banding.
So it's almost as like, where do you draw the line of enough genetic and morphology difference to change them into a new species or subspecies, because they are all gradually different to one another.
Absolutely. So it's very, very complex. It's very difficult. If you look at when Don did his book on snakes of Zimbabwe and Botswana, he basically described the two green mambas, our one as Angusticeps and intermedius for Zimbabwe. Nowhere did he give the morphology. We don't know what the differences are. Nowhere did he give us the break in distribution. So there's no good description of that. And intermediates at this stage I'm ignoring. I'm saying, well, it's not a good species.
Yes, because
it's just not good enough. If you look at the work that IMI is doing on boomslang, so he had a limited number of samples for the boomslang, and then he suggested that the ones from the Western Cape as far as Shishlui are Dysphyletus typus. Now, if it was just the Western Cape, I'd say they are vastly different from the Zululand ones. But then just above Shishlui, he now talks of Dendroaspis Dysphyletus typus viridis. And coming up here into the Highveld, it's all viridis. So, what do I do in my...
Where do you draw the line of this?
In my book revision, I'm just saying, guys, until you've done the work properly and given us a good description and the morphology and exactly where the breaks are in distribution, I'm going to ignore that. I'm just chucking it out.
Keep it as is.
And I will. So I'll put a little note in the bottom that there is talk that there are 2 subspecies, but it needs further investigation. That's
insane, and it takes quite a few years before things actually change because of the amount of work that goes into it.
Yes, it's a rude amount of work, and but the biggest issue is sampling. If you look at our dwarf adders, let's just talk about horn adders, Pittus cordalis. Genetically, cordalis, Schneideri, and Paraguay don't have massive differences. They're actually quite similar.
Wow!
And if you look at cordalis itself, there could be a half a dozen species in Pittus cordalis.
Yes.
But you need to sample extensively. You need to have very, very good data before you can now start wanting to split things and do all that sort of stuff.
And now it's not that easy to do that with something like your dwarf bitters, where they're not as easy to find as something like a puff adder or wrinkles, which are more abundant.
Yeah, it's the time. You've got to put the time in. Horn adders are very easy to find, but you've got to put the time in.
Yes.
You've got to be out there. You've got to cover those massive areas. Botswana, if you look around Khansi, if you look at the distribution maps of black mamba and python, there are no black mambas and python in Khansi. They're there. We have photographs of them. They're there. But if you look at, again, something like a black mamba, you have a 2.8 meter snake. If you want to pickle that, if you want to preserve it for a museum, you need a lot of formalin. You need a large container. And then the museum needs a large container to preserve it in alcohol. So historically, black mambas and pythons were not well preserved. Here and there, someone might have chopped a head off. That helps, and put it in a museum. But because of the lack of museum specimens, we've missed out on some distributions.
So you can't say exactly how far they are distributed from, and that's the reasoning, just because of museum sampling.
Yep.
Oh wow.
And in the Northern Cape, we're seeing black mambas occurring from Stella and from Kuruman. They're starting to pop into places like close to Uppington. So the black mamba certainly comes much further into the Northern Cape than we thought historically. No question.
Wow, it's incredible. It's a fine line of science and a lot of work that needs to go into it. So
the other complexity, Bryce, is now I do a snake profile that we use in our African Snakebite Institute pages, where I show you what a mamba looks like and where it occurs. Or I revise my complete guide to snakes and I do a distribution map. It's very, very complex. So what a lot of the guys will do is they'll pick up one of my old books and they'll copy the map and say that's where black mambas come from. Well, that map was drawn in 2003. We're now in 2020.
We have a lot more information.
A lot more information. But even though we have a lot more information, it's even more complex than that, because if there's a likelihood that black mambas are found in Kuruman and Stella, and the let's say the virtual museum maps don't show them, I cannot afford to produce a book that a medical doctor is going to use as a reference, and he has a practice in Kuruman and he says, I have a snake bite, but the black mambas aren't here, so it can't be a black mamba. So I've got to compensate for that as well. So
a lot more thought has to go into
Absolutely.
It than just, okay, this is where it occurs, boom, slap it on a piece of paper.
Absolutely.
How long has it taken you to revise this book?
About a year. Yeah,
that's not actually that long.
It's not that long. And the book that Luke and I are doing, The Reptiles and Amphibians of Southern Africa, we reckon that in about a year from now, we will be finished with it.
Wow. Yeah. That's a A lot of work goes into it, which I keep saying, but it's what you've chosen to do. So do you find it still like fun to do, or do you still prefer field herping?
I know, absolutely. I wake up excited every day of my life. I honestly do. Today I'm going to take photographs. I'm going to work on my book. I'm going to do this and that. I'm going to, go and do some training. I love doing what we do. We really enjoy. Yes, there are drags. Everything's not all just fun. But overall, the way I live should be legal. Should not be allowed.
That's crazy. You're an author of so many amazing books. What does it take to write these books?
Sure. It's a tough one. I think first of all, you've got to be very thorough, because one of the things that's going to happen is that your book is going to be reviewed, and you're going to have smart guys, much smarter guys than you, reviewing your book, and they're going to say, yeah, it's a nice book, but he got this wrong and he got that wrong, and the photographs are sort of okay, but he could have done a lot better. And at the end of the day, everything affects sales. And we've seen it in the past. Guys produce a book on snakes or reptiles, it doesn't really take off, and eventually the publisher just pops what's left and they just write it off and say, okay, we tried that, it didn't work. So you've got to do a book. You've got to first of all decide who your market is, and that takes some doing. You've got to find yourself a very good publisher, because the publishers, not just do they have the ability to design and edit a book properly, they also have the infrastructure to distribute it well and market it well. And if your book's not well marketed,
then you have no sales.
You have no sales. There's a tortoise book. Orty Borquin and Richard Boycott did a book on tortoises years back. A very nice book. I think it was in the 80s, and it was done through Southern Books, and the book did quite well, and then they revised it, and then they decided they're going to self-publish, because publishers make all the money, and we're going to have the money this time. And it's very expensive to print a book, and you've got to print large numbers if it's in color to make it viable. And they published this, and I don't know how many they published, but eventually they didn't have the infrastructure to really move it. And eventually I received a phone call, and I said, listen, we've got like 3,000 of these books in a garage. It's now totally out of date. Do you want to buy them, or can we donate it? Do you want them? And I said, no, thanks. I don't even want to pick them up.
Yes.
It's a waste of time. It's now out of date. It's history. It's finished. So yeah, to get back to your question, you've got to make sure that your facts are good, that you've really gone through the literature, and the scientific literature, not the stuff that you see in U Magazine and in the local newspaper or Facebook. Everything on Facebook isn't necessarily true, So you've got to go through the literature, and that's really, really hard work. And I've been very fortunate in that I've had this major involvement in science and in herpetology as a hobby. So I'm sort of, on the one side, I'm involved with science, and the other side, I'm writing popular books. And then, having been in both publishing and in book retail, I understand publishing well. I was a director of Southern Book Publishers, and having owned over 50 bookshops of my own, I understand the retail side of it. So these are all things that you need to consider. But anyone can write a book. It's hard work. It really is hard work. But there's a lot of opportunities.
So it's a lot harder to write a book that's like factual about these snakes than something like an autobiography.
Yes. It's autobiography. You can just regurgitate what happened in your life. Whereas with a book on reptiles, it's got to be very, very factual. And every bit that I've written in the revised edition of this complete guide to snakes has been checked by very good scientists. They go through and they say, no, you've got this wrong. You can't say that. Or you forgot about this.
Yes.
Or, what about that 1936 paper? Recently, we had a long discussion with Johan Marais and with Steve Spalls, because in my book I mentioned black mambas eat. There's evidence of black mambas swallowing a small antelope, and Brian said, "Where did you get that from?" And we started looking and scratching, and we couldn't find it. Then I spoke to Steve, and Steve said, "Sure, Johan, I think you've been smoking something," because Broadley never mentioned, and Don Broadley was really, really thorough, and it was a young Dacre. And then we started going through the literature, and I couldn't find anything in Eisenmonger's books and in Ionides' books, and I just couldn't find this reference. And eventually, I found a book on East African antelope where it was referenced.
Okay.
And I saw that 20 years back, but I forgot where I saw it.
Yes.
But eventually we found the reference. And then you have evidence that you can put in your book. But to say that spitting cobras eat black mambas, where did you get that from? Is there a reference?
Yes.
Is it published in a scientific paper? No, it's not.
You can't just say things.
You can't say it. Then it's an assumption. And then you start dabbling with writing nonsense.
Yes, and you don't want to write nonsense.
You don't want to write nonsense because you just lose your credibility.
Yes.
So that's not good.
How often do you find when you are like revising this book that new information comes up and you've just written that part on an animal and you have to change it?
Well, the process is quite dragged out. I handed in the manuscript last month, and the book will probably only appear the end of next year, the soonest. Wow. So up to a point, I can make changes. So we keep a very close eye on the literature, and if it is significant, if let's say in 3 months' time, someone describes a new slug eater from the Western Cape, I'm going to have to seriously consider including it as either a species account or at least below the common slug eater, a little paragraph that says, "Oh, a new one's just been described from the Western Cape, and it's called Das Herpetologists whatever."
That's crazy. So it is an issue when going into doing this. So you have to consider also when you take the time and do this, you want to do it as fast as possible.
Yes. But it doesn't matter how fast you do it. The day it is published is out of date. That's something to think about. Yeah.
But then again, your last book has served well for the past 14 years.
It's amazing. It still sells. We sell books at all our courses. All our equipment and books obviously go to the courses, and I sell a rude amount of these books, loads and loads of them. It's 16 years old, and if you talk book sales, so in South Africa, a successful book is if you can sell, say, 3,000 copies. So if you do a book on chameleons or tortoises and you can sell 3,000 copies over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, you've done well. It's
regarded as a bestseller.
Yeah, it's successful. The Complete Guide to Snakes has now sold just close to 100,000 copies.
Wow.
In the last 15, 16 years.
That's a lot
So
of
it's
copies.
really successful. And if I look at all my books together that I've done, my first book, Snake vs. Man, came out in 1985. So in total, we've sold over 500,000 books to date, of all my books.
That's a lot of...
Yeah, it's a rude amount of books.
It is.
And then there are guys that say, but what do you do for conservation? I said, give me a break. I think I've done my share.
Yes, true. I mean, publishing these books and that, it does have a huge impact in conservation.
Massive.
And like, for instance, the other day, I met this little kid who watches me on YouTube, and he got your book, and it's now 16 years old, but you can see this book's torn up. He's been through it page by page, and he absolutely loves it. And that is conservation
absolutely.
right there, because
Absolutely.
What is he going to do in the future for these animals?
It's very rare for me to train at a game lodge, and I do game lodges all over Africa. It's very rare for me to train at a lodge that don't have 1 or 2 of my books.
That's something that's very, very nice for yourself to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like
I've done my share. I've tried.
Exactly. Not more than tried. You've made an impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with having said that, you're an incredibly great businessman, and not many people are able to make a living while doing what they love and working with these animals. How did you do it?
Yeah, it's not easy. I started the African Snakebite Institute about 10 years back. And you've got to be innovative. You've got to be smart. You've got to put the effort in, and you've got to reinvent yourself every single day. And if you don't do that, you just become a fossil. You just stay behind. And we're a small team. Basically, we've got Ashley, Luke, Bianca, and we've got Mandy doing our orders. We've got Teacher who manufactures all our equipment or assembles all of the equipment. And you have no idea how hard our team works. I get emails from Ashley and Luke at 11 at night. I'm busy with this poster. Should I say this or should I say that? The team, they work. I'm pretty much busy with my books or with the African Snakebite Institute 24/7. It's very rare for me not to be busy with something at 10, 11, 12 at night.
Wow.
So
that shows
we put a lot of effort
extreme passion also.
And you've got to be smart. You've got to, you can't just regurgitate the same stuff all the time. And you've got to look at quality. We really pride ourselves, the equipment that we supply. We guarantee, if you buy a scorpion torch from me and a year later it packs up, phone me, I'll replace it. It's a no-brainer. If your tongue breaks, contact me. We'll sort it out. We'll fix it. It's an absolute no-brainer.
Building a relationship with the customer, and that helps the brand
Absolutely,
also.
yeah.
Because of quality.
Yeah.
Because you're selling quality stuff as well. So if there's someone wanting to get into like herpetology, what advice could you give them?
I get that question very often. And, I think in fairness, one has to say that it's not as if herpetology is overflowing with opportunities.
Yes.
Opportunities are scarce. The best route is to go and do a Bachelor of Science degree, do your honors, and then at least a master's. Get to one of the decent labs like Graham Alexander's lab or Brian Maritz's lab and specialize in some aspect of herpetology. And then only then, ideally, do your PhD. But once you've done the master's, you're at the beginning. Okay. Then you at rock bottom, and then you can start thinking about earning some money. Not a rude amount of money, but that's where it'll start.
Yes.
And a lot of those guys will then end up initially doing a postdoc at one of the labs or being a lecturer and doing part-time studies. And then you can hopefully specialize. And some guys have done incredibly well. Brian Marais, gosh, what a success story. He has his own lab. He's doing phenomenally well. Werner Conradi at P Museum doing absolutely brilliantly. So there are lots of success stories as well.
Just like you said, you got to reinvent yourself every single day.
You got to work at it. It's not just going to fall on your lap.
Yes, it takes dedication and passion. You have an amazing and incredible app, the ASI Snakes app. What was the idea behind this app?
So what happened is I have a very dear friend, Willem van Sail, who's part of ASI. Willem is a computer boffin. We always tease him because his dad calls him a typist. His dad says, "I never thought my son's going to become a typist." And Willem looks after our website, all our social media. And Willem tried an app in the Western Cape where he thought that he would put snake removers on there so that if people want to find a snake remover, they can see who's closest to them. And he played around with it, but it didn't really take off. And the problem was that it's very difficult to market an app. It's not a product that you put on a shelf and people see. So how do you get people to become part of your app? And then he approached us and said, "Guys, would you be interested in taking over this project?" And I said, "Absolutely." And we developed the app. We added very unique features. For instance, local snakes. Right here where we are now, we press local snakes. It shows us what snakes occur around here. And this is all the data from all the distributions ever recorded that we've digitized. So it's not just guesswork. So it's very, very cleverly done.
So it uses your location to...
It uses your location to see what has been recorded within about an 80-kilometer radius of where you are.
Wow.
And it has its gaps because if an area is very poorly collected, there might be no records from there. But once we get a record, we add it. Snake removers. It uses your location to tell you how many kilometers the nearest snake remover is from you and his phone number. So I'll show it to you right now. There's 7 guys around here. This guy's 2.3 kilometers. That guy's 7 kilometers. That guy's 12 kilometers away. It's brilliant.
That's incredible.
It's brilliant. We've got hospitals loaded up. If you need to get to a hospital, you can navigate via the app to the nearest hospital if you have a snake bite. The first aid is on there. Snake profiles, scorpion profiles, spider profiles. You see a snake, you think it's a night adder. You're not quite sure it is one. Call up the night adder profile. There's a distribution map, and there's 4 color photographs. Shows you exactly if it's the right snake and if it's in the right area.
And you can send in photos for ID too, can't you?
So the ID part is brilliant. So again, what we do with the ID part is the moment so with your app, if you see any reptile, you see a spider or a scorpion, you want an ID, you photograph it with the app with your cell phone. It goes straight through to Luke, does most of the IDing, and Luke is brilliant with this. He's now also sort of taking over all the virtual museum IDs. And you geocache, so we know where you sent it from. So already we have the locality. And then we will quickly ID the snake and we'll confirm that. And what we are now finding is that medical doctors are using this. They have a snakebite victim, the snake's been killed and brought in, or there's a photograph, they contact us via the app and we quickly ID the snake for them. And that helps them with the treatment. So this app it's exploded. We have, I think we had about 108,000 downloads now. It's one of the top 10 apps in South Africa. and it's free. We don't charge for it.
That's
So we've developed this whole app free of charge, absolutely free.
That's amazing, and it's helping save lives and doing
time.
a huge amount for conservation too.
Massively. And we're adding features all the time. We've got quizzes there. So if people want to get to know their snakes, they can start with a beginner's quiz, and they do it a few times. They get good marks. They go to the intermediate quiz, and we show them different snakes. They've got to guess the ID, and they go to the advanced quiz.
That's amazing.
So all of these things are, so yeah, we're very excited about the app. It's doing incredibly well. It's just like all over the place. And nowadays, everywhere I go, where I do public talks, when I do courses, I'll ask people with a show of hands, who's downloaded our app? 80% of them have the app. Everywhere I go, they have the app already.
That's awesome.
So it's brilliant. We're really, really excited about it. We do courses. We earn money through selling equipment, through doing courses, but we have a very big social responsibility as well. So all of our posters are free downloads. You can download over 100 posters. They're free downloads. You can share our easy IDs. You can share our profiles. It's all over the social media. It's free. I do lectures. Last year I had over 600 doctors that went through my snakebite lectures free of charge. I drive to Kimberley. I drive to Zululand. It's free. There's no charge for that. All of that. Veterinarians. We've now developed for the state vets an online course where they can earn CPD points free of charge. So that'll come out the next month. So the state vets can do a course on reptiles where it helps them implement the PAPA regulations. So the Performing Animal Protection Act permits are issued to any person who displays or uses snakes. If you take snakes to schools, if you've got a zoo, if you've got a snake park, if you do snake handling courses, you have to have a PAPA permit. And we're going to help the state vets with how they have to inspect for PAPA permits. So we've written that module for them, free of charge.
That's amazing. And it's helping so many people.
All the time. It's all just part of it. So our other very ambitious project, so we started an ASR foundation. And I have this ambitious dream where I want to set up 25 anti-venom banks throughout South Africa that will at all times have at least 15 vials of polyvalent anti-venom and 2 vials of worm slug anti-venom. And I'm going to do this through corporate funding. I will get the money for it. And that anti-venom will be available. It'll also be available for vets and hospitals. So if a hospital needs it urgently, they can draw from there. If a vet needs it urgently, they can draw from there. They just have to replace it. That's all they have to do. So I want anti-venom banks in Polokwane and Kimberley and Uppington. I want one in PE. I want one in East London. I want one even in Gauteng. I get called on a Saturday night where a hospital in Gauteng is short of anti-venom and they urgently need anti-venom. So I do keep anti-venom for those emergencies and I supply it. And if it's necessary, I supply it free of charge.
Yes.
I don't charge for it. If they can't afford it, I will supply it.
That's amazing. And it's not something many people would do because anti-venom does have a huge price tag to it.
And an expiry date.
Yes. So it has to be replaced every 3 years or so.
So this is the foundation is now a registered non-profit organization. So we will be knocking on corporate doors and say, come on guys, time to cough up. We need some money.
So do you have anywhere where the listeners can go and donate to that as of yet?
Yes, go to our website. We have bank details there for the foundation. And any money that goes into the foundation will be used 100% for anti-venom. Not a cent will go to any salary or whiskey or anything like that.
That's incredible. So you are doing a lot at the moment. What can we expect from you in the future?
Sure, Bryce, that's a very, very interesting question. Look, Ashley's biggest fear is that I go for a shower because every time I come out of the shower, I have some ideas. And I'll say to Ashley, and she, oh no, you've been showering again, because I've got 4 minutes to do nothing in the shower. So I think.
Yes.
I think product-wise, we've got dynamic stuff happening. We've got great new products coming out all the time. The whole ASR is just exploding. We're growing and growing. Our social media has gone absolutely crazy. We have close on 400,000 people on our various social media pages. And the reason for the growth is that we're delivering. We're giving people what they want. We listen to what they want. The equipment, what's very encouraging is I go to the Huntix show and every second guy that walks up in his khaki or his camouflage tells me that, no man, I just kill snakes. I've got a shotgun.
Yeah.
The number of snake tongues that we are now selling to farmers is insane. We've got farmers, lodges. We used to make, we started off making a few dozen tongs and we made a few hundred. We now manufacture thousands at a time just to keep up with the demand.
That's
It's
incredible.
gone absolutely crazy. And then, of course, through our training, we try and show people how to use tongs without hurting snakes.
Yes.
A lot of people criticize tongs. No, snake tongs hurt snakes. Yes, any tool in the wrong hands doesn't do the right job. But I'd much rather a farmer have a pair of tongs than a shotgun.
I totally
no-brainer.
agree.
Yeah.
It's way better.
Yeah.
Yes, the snake may potentially be injured, but these animals are also extremely rugged and can adapt and survive that. So better that than having their head chopped off.
Yeah. We have puff adders and snouted cobras and wrinkles that we use in our regular courses, and obviously we rotate the snakes.
Yes.
We have more than enough snakes to rotate. We don't hammer the snakes to death. If we do an advanced black mamba course, we have more than enough mambas for everyone to handle. But we have snakes that we've had for 8-9 years. Our snakes are microchipped. It's a PAPA
Regulation.
requirement. We have snakes that have been. Some people say you cannot single hook a puff adder. You've got to use a double hook. How many people have 2 hooks?
Yes.
And we've got puff adders that we single hook gently, carefully on our training for the last 8 years, and they are in very good condition. Nothing wrong with them.
Yes. I was actually speaking to someone on this earlier with breaking ribs in the regards to like your heavy-bodied snakes, and they're actually pretty rugged animals. I've seen photos of gaboons like 2 meters up in an enclosure, and I've seen some rhino vipers in the wild also, well, photographs up like 3 meters. This heavy-bodied snake climbing on pretty thin branches.
And they fall out.
Yes, and they are fine. So these animals can handle it too.
Yeah. No, we do stress safety. We always, I always say to people that I want you to bear in mind that you're dealing with a wild animal, and I want to treat it with respect at all times.
And then they will treat you with respect too.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing. The gentler you are, the gentler they are.
Very true. If you run around and act all crazy, so will the snake, because it thinks you're going to try and hurt it or harm it. Because if you think about it, how much bigger are we compared to them? I mean, their heads were like 3 centimeters off the ground, and you like 1.8. It's a huge
That's
difference.
terrifying.
It is. Someone towering over them like the Eiffel Tower, literally. So this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. Where can people find more out about you and what you do?
So I think the best is just to go to our website, africansnakebiteinstitute.com. We have a Facebook page, africansnakebiteinstitute.com. If people battle to find either of those, just Google Johan Marais. Comes up first. It's easy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's the end of a great episode. Thank you everyone for listening. It's been a pleasure having Johan Marais here. Such a great amount of information that I've learned. Thank you.
Thanks, Bryce. My pleasure.
Cheers.